why the army and why an officer?
Thanks ever so much for the invitation to join on the podcast, and I can only apologise for the length of all of the titles. It always seems to be quite a mouthful. Nothing's ever straightforward or short. So why the army? Well, I would first of all say not necessarily why be an officer. I think the first observation I'd offer is that there's such a multitude, such a variety of opportunities for people to join, whether it's a technical arm, a combat arm, the infantry, the cavalry, the armored corps, other professions at arms, that joining as a soldier, joining as an officer offers plenty of variety. I think one of the many ways of joining, and perhaps something that's not appreciated widely, is just how many apprenticeships the armed forces and the army in particular offer. And they do very well year on year. So 2022, for example, the army was the top employer across the United Kingdom for apprenticeships, closely followed by the Royal Navy, then BT, and then Royal Air Force. So if anybody is wanting to learn on the job and be paid for acquiring qualifications for an apprenticeship, it's an opportunity there. You can join directly as a soldier, directly as an officer, professionally qualified routes, doctors, lawyers, dentists, and so on. So it's I think the simple answer to your question of why is because there's such choice there on offer for the right person who wishes to pursue the opportunities.
And I think just building on that in terms of the phrase that you used, multitude of opportunities, do you think that's one of the biggest things that's sort of misperceived about the armed forces in general, in the sense that there is a real breadth of opportunity? You don't just have to want to go on, as the media would portray it, as in the certain roles that are glorified to an extent, but also just portrayed heavily in the media. There's a lot of other, not necessarily background, but just other routes that you think people can go in, but because of the misperception, they don't often, let's say, get enticed to go in.
Dylan, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. And I think the Army recruiting office will be tapping on your door asking you to come and work for them pretty soon. Now, you've encapsulated it perfectly. And it's understandable, actually, I think, the way that that many might perceive the armed forces, or the army specifically, to be, for a number of reasons. The first, perhaps, if we were to go back a generation or two, when there was national service, most families had a member of that family that had served in any of the armed forces. So immediately there was a familial link that made things, of course, much clearer. Over time, that has faded. The army and the armed forces have shrunk in size. The roles and responsibilities have changed over time, and dramatic depictions on television present the army and the armed forces in a particular way that doesn't necessarily convey all the options that are there. But I think a really good antidote to that is, in this information age where only a click, a mouse click away, or a surf online, my goodness, there's so much information that is there, whether that's the Army's own website or other things, articles that might be there. So you're right, there is a perception, and the perception is only partially true. That's because much more broadly there are so many opportunities that are there.
Cool.
So could I, if you don't mind, if we can draw back to the army, I mean, one of the clear distinctions within the army is the difference between soldiers and officers. And so you've gone down the officer route, and may I ask, how come you decided to become an officer and not a soldier? What was the difference, or what was the deal breaker?
So about 3 million years ago, when I was a teenager, I was mulling over what career I might pursue, and I was thinking of law, I was thinking of architecture, and I was thinking of a career in the army, or a job in the army, actually. I wasn't necessarily thinking of a 30-plus year career as it is at this point in time. And it's very easy to actually take a first step, followed by another, enjoy each step at a time, blink, and then you realize that 5 years have passed, 10 years have passed, 20 years have passed, 30 years have passed. And so the route to joining as an officer for me was first and foremost through the Army's sixth form college. It no longer exists. There are different routes in now. People might secure bursaries or scholarships, for example, for sixth form. But for me, that was in essence a sixth form scholarship at a residential sixth form college. And that was a feeder route to the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst to join as a commissioned officer. Now, joining as an officer is not for everybody, because the Army is seeking certain or a variety of leadership attributes that are demonstrated, and some people demonstrate other leadership attributes that are better suited to being a soldier. So for me, it was partially attraction to the opportunities of the sixth form college. It was mostly attraction to the excitement and opportunities of a career in the army, or job within the army. And an officer's route or commissioned route through Sandhurst seemed to be the most natural route for me to take. Now, that's not necessarily the case for other people who might wish to go to phase 1 training as a soldier, or as I described briefly earlier, the Army Foundation College to pursue an apprenticeship.
And I think it's really important, actually, what we've picked up on already is this whole aspect of your career versus your job in terms of the short-term and long-term predictions that sort of students make in their minds. So I think I can speak from personal experience that I want to go into law personally, and I know because I want to pursue a degree apprenticeship, like that's definitely something where it's going to be very full on, and I've kind of got most things mapped out with cause for change. And I think it's quite important, actually, if we pick up on this just slightly, not all students need to have it all mapped out. It's just what seems sort of appealing to you and what really makes you get up and be like, I'm really going to enjoy this today. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to make myself a better person. And if that career, while you might not even understand what long-term progression it has, in that short term, if it gives you that buzz, you might as well go for it, because what's the worst it can do? Just give you that and then make you realize, okay, I might want to move on to this in 5 years or 10 years time, as you said. So I think that's just a really important point for students and our listeners to pick up on. So I'm really glad that you mentioned it.
Well, I think there's another misperception, and I would have been guilty of this 30 or so years ago, in thinking that a career in the army is